She thought the snowstorm was the danger, until the man offering to protect her turned out to be the one everyone else feared. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe, because once the doors lock and the snow starts falling, there's no turning back. The storm didn't arrive politely. It swallowed the city whole. Snow slammed against the tall windows of the restaurant in thick, blinding sheets, turning the familiar street outside into a white void. The street lamps glowed like distant stars, hazy and indistinct, as if the world beyond the glass had been erased. Inside, the restaurant felt too quiet, too large for just one person moving through it. She wiped her hands on her apron and glanced at the clock above the bar. 11:47 p.m. Closing time had come and gone, but the city hadn't let her leave. Her phone buzzed for the 5th time in 10 minutes. Another emergency alert. Blizzard warning. Roads impassable. Public transport suspended. Stay indoors. As if she had a choice. She exhaled slowly and pushed her exhaustion down, the way she always did. The last of the chairs were flipped onto tables, their wooden legs pointing toward the ceiling like something abandoned in a hurry. The kitchen lights were already off, leaving only the soft amber glow from the bar lamps and the low hum of the refrigerator in the back. She had planned to be home by 10. A simple night. Close up, count the register, walk the 4 blocks to her apartment, kick off her shoes, and sleep. Instead, she was alone in a restaurant that suddenly felt like an island. Her manager had called an hour earlier, voice tight with stress. "Storm's bad. Worse than they predicted. Don't risk it. Lock up and stay inside. I'll deal with it in the morning. Stay inside." She laughed quietly at that, the sound hollow in the empty space. Inside where? The restaurant wasn't home. It wasn't safe or warm in the way home was supposed to be. It was stainless steel counters and dark corners, and doors that were never meant to be locked with someone still inside. She finished mopping the last stretch of floor, the scent of cleaner sharp in the air, and leaned the mop against the wall. Her shoulders ached, her feet throbbed. 12-hour shifts didn't care about snowstorms. She shrugged out of her apron and hung it behind the bar, glancing once more at the windows. The snow was thicker now, relentless, as if the city itself had decided to disappear for the night. That's when the power flickered. Just once. A blink. Her heart jumped, and she stilled, listening. The lights steadied again, but the silence afterward felt heavier. Charged. "Get a grip," she muttered to herself. She wasn't afraid. She'd been alone plenty of times before. Late nights, early mornings, empty streets. Invisibility had a way of following her everywhere. People didn't notice women like her. Waitresses who moved quietly, cleaned thoroughly, and left without making a mark. She grabbed her coat from the hook near the back door and wrapped it tightly around herself, the fabric worn soft from years of use. The restaurant's heat had already started to struggle against the storm, cold seeping in through unseen cracks. She was heading toward the office to grab her phone charger when she heard it. The sound of the front door. Not the wind, not the building settling. A deliberate click, then the low groan of hinges. Her breath caught. The restaurant was supposed to be closed. Locked. She stood frozen between the bar and the dining room, heart pounding loud enough she was sure it could be heard. For a split second she considered calling out, but something stopped her. Instinct, maybe, or the sudden awareness that the city outside had vanished, leaving only this space, this moment. Footsteps echoed against tile. Slow, heavy, unhurried. A figure emerged from the white blur beyond the glass, pushing the door shut behind him. Snow clung to his coat, his hair, his shoulders, melting into dark patches on the floor as he stepped fully inside. He didn't look at her right away. He stood there, tall and still, like someone who wasn't surprised to find himself alone in an empty restaurant during a blizzard, like someone who belonged wherever he stood. Then he lifted his head. Their eyes met. Something shifted in the air. Subtle but undeniable. The kind of shift you felt before a storm broke, before something irreversible happened. She should have spoken, asked who he was, told him they were closed. Instead, she just stood there, forgotten mop water cooling at her feet, staring at the stranger who had walked in out of the storm, like the night itself had delivered him. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible, and she had no idea that before the snow stopped falling, she would wish she had been. The door should have been locked. She knew it was locked. She remembered the cold bite of the metal key in her fingers, the solid click as the deadbolt slid into place. She'd even tested the handle, once, twice, out of habit. The city outside had already vanished into white chaos, and instinct had told her not to leave anything unsecured. So when the door opened anyway, her first thought was that the storm had finally broken something. The second was that she was no longer alone. The bell above the door didn't ring. The wind swallowed the sound as the door pushed inward, snow exploding into the entryway like smoke. For a heartbeat, all she could see was white. Then a dark shape stepped through it. He filled the doorway. Tall, broad-shouldered, drenched from head to toe, snow melting into his coat and dripping onto the tile in slow, deliberate drops. The door closed behind him with a heavy thud, sealing them inside, and the storm outside became a muffled roar. He didn't rush, didn't look around in confusion the way lost people did. He stood there as if he'd chosen this place, this moment. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Her voice failed her. She swallowed and tried again. We're closed. He lifted his head slowly. The light caught his face, and something inside her tightened. His features were sharp, severe, carved by discipline rather than softness. Dark hair plastered to his forehead, eyes so deep and steady they seemed almost black. There was no panic in them, no apology, just assessment. I know, he said. His voice was low, controlled, carrying an accent she couldn't place. Not heavy, just enough to feel intentional. Dangerous, in a way that had nothing to do with volume. She glanced instinctively at the door behind him, then back at the windows. The snow outside had thickened, relentless, the streetlights barely visible now. Even if she could get past him, even if she wanted to, the city had made the decision for her. You can't stay, she said, though the words felt thin the moment they left her mouth. His gaze flicked briefly to the windows, then returned to her. I can't leave. Something about the certainty in his tone made her stomach dip. She shifted her weight, painfully aware of how small she must look standing behind the bar, coat still open, hair pulled back in a loose, tired knot. She wasn't afraid of men. Not usually, but there was something about this one, about the way he stood so still, so contained, that set her nerves on edge. You need to go, she said again, firmer this time. The storm will kill me if I go back out there, he interrupted calmly. The bluntness of it stole her breath. He took a step forward. Not aggressive, not hurried, just closer. Instinct made her take one step back. I'm not here to hurt you, he said, as if he could hear her thoughts. But I will not freeze to death on your doorstep. Snow slid from his shoulders, melting into dark pools at his feet. She noticed then that his hands were bare. No gloves. Red from the cold, fingers stiff. You could call someone, she said weakly. The police. An ambulance. A muscle in his jaw tightened. No. That single word carried finality. She hesitated, torn between fear and the quiet, awful awareness that he might be telling the truth. That sending him back into the storm wasn't just unkind. It was lethal. You're soaked, she murmured, before she could stop herself. His eyes flicked to her face, something unreadable passing through them. Yes. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken things. The restaurant creaked softly as the wind pressed against it, as if reminding her how fragile the barrier really was. I'll stay over there, he said, gesturing toward a table near the windows. I won't touch anything. I won't come behind the bar. When the storm eases, I'll leave. It sounded rehearsed, like he'd had this conversation before. She hesitated, then nodded once, slowly, reluctantly. Fine, she said. But you stay where I can see you. The corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, more like approval. "As you wish." He moved toward the table, shedding snow with every step, and she locked the office door behind the bar without drawing attention to it. Her hands shook as she wrapped them around a mug, more for something to hold than for the heat. He sat down, long legs folding easily beneath the table, eyes never leaving her. The city outside was gone. The doors were locked. The storm had decided for both of them, and she had the sudden, unsettling feeling that letting him stay would change far more than just the course of her night. The storm grew teeth. It howled outside the restaurant like a living thing, wind slamming into brick and glass with a violence that made the walls tremble. Snow piled against the doors faster than she could track, creeping upward in uneven drifts that swallowed the lower panes of the windows. The city was no longer just quiet. It was gone, erased, buried. She stood near the back door, phone pressed to her ear, listening to silence. "No signal," she whispered, lowering it slowly. The man across the room watched her, dark eyes sharp and unblinking. He hadn't moved from the table by the window, hadn't touched anything except the chair he sat in. His coat lay draped over the back, heavy with melting snow, a dark puddle spreading beneath it. Steam rose faintly from his shoulders as the restaurant's struggling heat fought the cold. She tried the back door next. It didn't budge. She shoved harder, panic creeping up her spine as she leaned her weight into it. Snow pressed back from the other side like a wall, solid and unyielding. "Don't," he said. The word wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. She turned slowly. "What?" "You'll exhaust yourself," he continued calmly, "and you won't open it." "You don't know that." "I do." Something about the certainty in his voice made her chest tighten. She hated that, hated how easily he seemed to know things. She stepped away from the door, arms wrapping around herself as she tried to think. The front entrance was no better. Snow nearly halfway up the glass now, the outside world nothing but swirling white. "This wasn't supposed to happen," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "No," he agreed. "It rarely is." She shot him a look. "You sound like this isn't your first disaster." The corner of his mouth twitched. "It's not." The lights flickered again, longer this time. Her breath caught as the hum of the refrigerators dipped, then steadied. "If the power goes out," she began. "It won't," he said. She laughed weakly. "You very confident for someone who walked in here half frozen." His gaze softened. Not much, but enough that she noticed. Confidence isn't about comfort. The wind slammed into the building again, harder this time. Something outside cracked. Metal, maybe. A sign tearing loose. She jumped despite herself. He was on his feet in an instant. Not rushing. Not panicking. Just moving. "Stay away from the doors," he said, stepping closer, placing himself between her and the windows without making it obvious. "If something gives, glass will fly inward." Her pulse raced. "You don't get to tell me what to do." "No," he agreed quietly. "But I'm going to anyway." She bristled at that. "Excuse me?" "You shouldn't be alone tonight." The words landed heavier than they should have. She crossed her arms, lifting her chin. "I've been alone plenty of nights." "I'm sure you have," he said. "That doesn't mean you should be now." There it was again. That tone. Not pity, not flirtation. Something closer to vigilance. Like he was already guarding something that belonged to him. "Listen," she said, trying to steady her voice. "I didn't ask you to come in here. I didn't ask for company." "And yet," he replied, eyes flicking briefly to the sealed exits, "here we are." Another gust rattled the windows. The building groaned. She swallowed. "What if the roof—" "It will hold," he said. "This place is sturdier than it looks." "You seem to know a lot about this restaurant for someone who just wandered in." A beat passed. "I notice things," he said finally. The answer didn't satisfy her, but nothing about him did. She moved toward the bar, needing distance, needing something solid. He followed, not close enough to crowd her, but close enough that she was acutely aware of his presence. of the heat radiating from him now that the cold had begun to loosen its grip. "Sit," he said, nodding toward a stool. "I don't take orders from strangers." His gaze dropped briefly to her hands, trembling, though she hadn't noticed until that moment. "You're shaking," he said. "I'm cold." "Sit," he repeated, softer this time. Against her better judgment, she did. He shrugged out of his damp jacket and draped it over the back of a nearby chair, then pulled a clean cloth from behind the bar without asking, and began wiping snow from his hair, his movements efficient, practiced. "You're used to controlling rooms," she said quietly. "Yes. People listen when you speak. They survive when they do." The honesty of that sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the storm. "Who are you?" she asked. His eyes met hers, dark and unreadable. "Someone you're safer staying near than away from tonight." Outside, the storm roared louder, sealing the city into silence. And as terrifying as his presence was, she realized something even more unsettling. For the first time since the snow had started falling, she didn't feel completely alone. And that frightened her more than the storm ever could. The restaurant had never felt so small. Snow pressed against every window now, piled high enough to block the lower half of the glass, turning the outside world into a shifting wall of white. The doors were useless. Front and back both sealed by the storm, heavy drifts packed tight against them like concrete. Even the emergency exit might as well have been a painted illusion. They were locked in. She moved behind the bar, wiping down a counter that was already clean, more for something to do than necessity. The quiet inside felt louder than the storm. Every creak of the building, every distant thud of wind against brick amplified by the emptiness. He sat where she could see him, just as she'd demanded. One long leg stretched out, elbow resting casually on the table, but nothing about him was casual. His gaze followed her without apology, dark eyes sharp and attentive, as if cataloging her movements. "You're staring," she said without looking up. "I'm watching," he replied. "There's a difference." "Not tonight." The words settled between them, unsettling. She risked a glance at him and immediately wished she hadn't. He met her eyes without flinching, expression unreadable, the low light catching on sharp cheekbones, and the faint scar near his temple she hadn't noticed before. It looked old, healed, earned. "You don't look like someone who gets snowed in," she said. A ghost of a smile crossed his mouth. "And what does that look like?" "Panicked," she said. "Lost. Like this isn't where you're supposed to be." "And you think this isn't?" "I think," she said carefully, "that people like you usually don't end up trapped in restaurants with women like me." His eyes flicked briefly to the bar, then back to her. "People like me?" She hesitated. "You carry yourself like you're used to being obeyed." Silence stretched. Then he chuckled, soft, humorless. "That's an interesting observation." The lights flickered again, dimming for a heartbeat before steadying. She froze. "If the power goes out," she started. "It won't," he said again, too quick, too certain. "You keep saying that. And you keep doubting me." She set the cloth down and crossed her arms. "Why are you so sure?" His gaze drifted to the ceiling, then the walls. Backup generators, private lines. Her stomach tightened. "This place doesn't have—" "Not this place," he corrected. "The block." She stared at him. "How would you know that?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood and moved toward the window, peering out through the narrow strip of glass still visible above the snow. The street was empty, erased. No headlights, no people, just white and wind. "Because I don't leave things to chance," he said finally. Something in his tone made her skin prickle. She watched him more closely now, noticing details she'd dismissed earlier, the way his jacket had been tailored to fit him perfectly. The faint bulge at his side beneath his shirt. Not a phone. Something heavier. The subtle way his posture shifted whenever the building creaked, positioning himself without conscious thought. "You're not just wealthy," she said quietly. His head tilted slightly. "No." The honesty in that single word chilled her. "What are you?" she asked. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then his phone buzzed. The sound cut through the quiet like a blade. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening instantly. He didn't answer the call. Instead, he typed a brief reply, fingers moving fast and sure. She caught a glimpse of the name on the screen. She didn't recognize it, but the number of missed calls beneath it made her heart stutter. "You expecting someone?" she asked. "No," he said. "They're expecting me." "That doesn't make me feel better." "It shouldn't." Her pulse spiked. "You said I was safer with you." "You are." "And what about from you?" His gaze snapped to hers, something dark and serious passing through his eyes. "If you weren't safe with me, you wouldn't still be standing." The matter-of-fact delivery stole her breath. Outside, a distant siren wailed briefly before being swallowed by the storm. Then silence again. She hugged herself, suddenly very aware of how isolated they were. No witnesses, no easy escape. "People fear you," she said softly. "Yes." The answer was immediate, unapologetic. "Why?" she whispered. He studied her for a long moment, as if deciding how much truth she could handle. "Because I don't make empty threats," he said, "and because I protect what's mine." The words settled heavy in her chest. "I'm not yours," she said quickly. "No," he agreed, stepping closer, but stopping just far enough away to give her space. "Not yet." Her breath hitched. Outside, the storm raged on, sealing them into darkness and snow. And for the first time she understood that the danger tonight didn't come from the blizzard alone. It came from the man who watched her like the world beyond those locked doors no longer mattered. The phone rang again. Not the sharp, casual buzz it had made earlier, but a deep, insistent vibration that cut through the room like a warning. The sound seemed to shift something in him instantly. His posture straightened, shoulders squaring, every trace of stillness sharpening into alert control. She noticed the way his hand moved before he even looked at the screen. Quick, precise, like a man accustomed to reacting before danger announced itself. "I need a moment," he said, already turning away. It wasn't a request. He stepped toward the far end of the restaurant, near the service hallway that led to the kitchen and storage rooms. Far enough that he probably assumed she wouldn't hear him. Close enough that the quiet betrayed him. She didn't mean to listen. She told herself that as she reached for a glass behind the bar, her hands shaking just enough to make it clink softly against the counter. But when he spoke, low and dangerous, his words carried. Yes, a pause. Then, no, not tonight. The air in her lungs froze. Another pause. Longer this time. "I'm aware of the risk," he continued. "That's why I'm not moving." She turned slightly, angling her body toward the sound of his voice, heart beginning to race. The storm outside roared, but inside the restaurant every word landed with brutal clarity. "Because she's with me." Her stomach dropped. "She doesn't know," he said, voice hardening. "And she doesn't need to, not yet." She gripped the edge of the bar, pulse pounding. "Yes, I understand who's asking," he snapped quietly. "And I'm telling you, if anyone steps within 2 blocks of this location tonight, there will be consequences." Another pause. This time his voice lowered to something lethal. "I don't repeat myself." The call ended. Silence rushed in to fill the space, thick and suffocating. She didn't move right away, didn't breathe. Every instinct screamed at her to pretend she hadn't heard a word. But it was too late. The fragments were already locking together in her mind, forming something terrifyingly clear. He turned back toward her slowly. Their eyes met. She saw it then. The shift. The mask falling not because he wanted it to, but because there was no longer any point in hiding. "Who were you talking to?" she asked, her voice barely steady. He studied her for a long moment, calculating, measuring damage, risk. "Someone who works for me," he said. Her laugh came out sharp and disbelieving. "You said people obey you." "Yes." "You said they fear you." "Yes," she swallowed. "You didn't say why." He stepped closer, boots quiet against the floor, stopping just far enough away that she could still breathe. Barely. You weren't supposed to hear that call, he said. But I did. Another pause. Outside, something slammed into the building. A loose sign, maybe, sending a shudder through the walls. She flinched. He noticed. "What's your name?" she demanded suddenly. His brow furrowed slightly, as if the question surprised him. "You already know," he said. "No," she shook her head. "I know who you pretend to be. I want the real one." For a moment she thought he might refuse, that he'd shut her down, redirect, lie. Instead, he exhaled slowly. "Alessandra Moretti," he said. The name hit her like a physical blow. Her breath left her lungs in a rush. Her vision narrowed, a rush of blood roaring in her ears. "No," she whispered. He didn't correct her. Her mind raced, memories flooding in uninvited. Headlines she'd skimmed without reading. Whispered conversations between customers late at night. A name spoken in fear and fascination. Moretti. The man no one crossed. The man who owned half the city without ever putting his name on a building. The man rumored to end people without ever being seen. "You're lying," she said weakly. He shook his head once. You're the Mafia boss," she breathed. Yes, the word echoed in the empty restaurant, final and undeniable. Her legs felt unsteady. She braced herself against the bar, heart hammering so hard it hurt. "And you trapped me here," she said. "I protected you. You refused to let me leave." Her voice rose despite her effort to keep it calm. "You said it wasn't safe. Was that because of the storm, or because of you?" His gaze softened, just a fraction. "Both." Fear surged through her, hot and sharp. "I want to go." "No!" The word landed like a slammed door. Her head snapped up. "What?" "You can't," he said calmly. "Not tonight." "You don't get to decide that," she snapped, anger pushing past fear. "You don't get to hold me hostage because of who you are." He stepped closer, close enough now that she could feel his warmth, smell snow and something darker beneath it. "If you step outside," he said quietly, "you will not make it to the end of the block." "Because of the storm?" "Because of me." The honesty in his voice terrified her more than any threat. "They're looking for you," she whispered. "Yes." "And if they find you here, they won't." "How can you be so sure?" His eyes darkened. "Because this restaurant is now the safest place in the city." Her chest tightened painfully. "You should be afraid of me," he said softly. She was. But as she looked at him, standing between her and a world that had suddenly turned hostile, she realized something far more dangerous. He wasn't letting her leave, and part of her was beginning to understand why. The truth didn't settle gently. It pressed down on her chest like weight, making every breath feel measured and deliberate. Alessandro Moretti. The name echoed in her head, reshaping everything she thought she knew about the man standing in front of her. His calm, his certainty, the way the storm outside seemed almost secondary to whatever danger followed him like a shadow. "You should let me go," she said, her voice quieter now, steadier in a way that surprised her. "If I'm with you, I'm a target." He didn't deny it. "Yes," he said simply. The admission sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "Then why keep me here?" "Because," he replied, meeting her gaze without flinching, "if you leave, you'll be alone. I've been alone before." "Not like this," she swallowed. "You don't know that." "I do," he said. "The moment you heard my name, your life changed. Anyone who saw you with me tonight, anyone who knows you were here, they'll assume you matter, and assumptions get people killed." Her hands curled into fists at her sides. "So your solution is to trap me with you?" "To protect you," he corrected. "By taking away my choice. For now." Anger flared hot in her chest. "You don't get to decide what's best for me." "No," he agreed. "But I get to decide what I can allow." The words were controlled, measured, but unmistakably possessive. She paced a few steps away, running a hand through her hair, trying to think through the panic threatening to rise. The restaurant felt even smaller now, the walls closing in with every breath. "What does protection look like to someone like you?" she asked bitterly. Men with guns outside? Locked doors? Me never being alone again? Yes, he said without hesitation. She stopped pacing and stared at him. That's not safety. That's a cage. It's survival. At what cost? She demanded. He was quiet for a moment, as if considering how much truth to give her. Then he spoke. Staying near me puts you in danger, he said. I won't lie about that. But letting you walk out into a city where my enemies are searching blindly for leverage, where a woman connected to me would be valuable currency, that would be worse. Her breath trembled. You talk about this like it's inevitable. It is. Because of who you are. Yes. And you don't see anything wrong with pulling innocent people into that world? Something dark flickered in his eyes. I see it very clearly, which is why I don't let it happen often. The implication landed hard. Then why me? She asked softly. His gaze dropped to her face, intense and searching. Because you already crossed the line. I didn't choose this. No, he said. You chose kindness. That's often more dangerous. The storm outside surged again, wind screaming against the building. Somewhere in the distance, a loud crack echoed, glass or metal giving way. She flinched. He moved instantly, stepping closer, positioning himself between her and the sound without thinking. The gesture was instinctive, protective, terrifyingly natural. You see, he said quietly. This is the price. Her throat tightened. And what do you get out of it? His eyes held hers. Control. The honesty startled her. Control over what? Over whether you live. The words should have sent her running. Instead, they rooted her to the spot. And if I refuse? She asked. He hesitated, for the first time since he'd arrived. Then I will still protect you, he said slowly. But you won't like how. Fear curled low in her stomach. That sounds like a threat. It's a reality, he replied. Safety isn't free, not in my world. It costs loyalty, proximity, trust. And freedom, she whispered. Yes. Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. She could hear her own heartbeat, fast and uneven. You're asking me to accept something I never wanted, she said. I'm asking you to survive something you never saw coming. She looked at him, really looked, at the weight he carried so effortlessly, at the lines of control etched into every movement, at the strange restraint he showed, even now, when fear could have driven him to force. You won't touch me, she said suddenly. You won't decide my life beyond tonight. His jaw tightened. I won't touch you unless you allow it. And I won't decide your future, only whether you're alive to have one. It wasn't comforting, but it was honest. Outside, the storm continued to rage, sealing them together in snow and darkness. And as much as she hated to admit it, she understood something now. Protection from a man like Alessandro Moretti wasn't a gift. It was a contract. And whether she signed it or not, the price was already being calculated. The first gunshot didn't sound like one. It cracked through the storm outside, sharp, distant, swallowed almost immediately by wind and snow. But Alessandro stilled like a predator, sensing blood. His head turned toward the sound, eyes narrowing, every muscle in his body tightening. She felt it then. Not fear exactly, certainty. They're close, she said. Yes. The confirmation was quiet. Final. He crossed the restaurant in long, controlled strides and killed the lights nearest the windows, plunging half the space into shadow. The remaining glow came from the kitchen and the bar, muted and low. He gestured for her to move back, toward the interior wall. Stay where I can see you, he said. Her heart hammered as she obeyed. You said they wouldn't come here. I said they wouldn't find me easily, he corrected. That's not the same thing. Outside, headlights flared briefly through the snow, then vanished. Shadows moved where no one should have been able to move at all. They're searching, she whispered. Yes. With guns? Yes. The way he said it, like it was an inconvenience rather than a threat, made her stomach twist. Who are they? she asked. My mistakes, he replied. He checked his phone again, jaw tightening as he read whatever message had just come in. Then he looked at her, really looked, as if measuring how much truth she could carry without breaking. You asked why I don't trust anyone, he said. This is why. Another sound echoed outside. A door slamming. Voices, muffled, distorted by the storm, but unmistakably male. Organized, coordinated. People think betrayal is loud, Alessandro continued. It isn't. It's quiet. It smiles at you. It drinks with you. It tells you it's loyal while it sells your location piece by piece. Her throat felt dry. Someone sold you out. Yes. Tonight? No, he said. Long before tonight. Tonight is just when the debt comes due. The words settled heavily between them. She hugged her arms around herself. Then why come here? Why not somewhere safer? Because no one expected me to, he said. And because you were here. That landed harder than she expected. You shouldn't have involved me, she said. I didn't, he replied. Not intentionally. The storm outside roared louder, as if agreeing. One of my men, he continued, voice lower now, more raw. Someone I trusted. Someone who watched my back for years. He sold my movements to a rival family. Promised them access. Promised them tonight. Her breath caught. And now they're here to collect. Yes. And me? She asked quietly. What am I to them? Alessandro's gaze darkened. Your leverage, or collateral, or a message. Her blood ran cold. That's why you can't leave, he said. Not because I want control, because if they see you alone, frightened, unprotected, they will take you, and they will use you to get to me. Silence pressed down on her chest like a weight. You don't trust anyone, she said slowly, because trusting them gets people killed. Yes, even the people you care about. His jaw flexed. Especially them. Another gunshot cracked, closer this time, followed by shouting. Commands barked in a language she didn't recognize. Alessandro moved again, this time toward a service door behind the kitchen, checking the lock, reinforcing it with a heavy metal rack without hesitation. He knew this building, knew its weaknesses, knew how to turn a restaurant into a fortress if he had to. This is why tonight is more dangerous than you understand, he said, returning to her side. They're not just hunting me. They're hunting certainty, proof that I can bleed. She looked up at him, heart racing. And can you? His expression didn't change. Everyone can. The honesty in that scared her more than bravado ever could. If something happens, she said, voice shaking despite her effort to keep it steady. If they get inside. They won't, he said immediately. You can't promise that. No, he admitted, but I can promise this. He stepped closer, lowering his voice, his presence solid and immovable in the dim light. No one touches you while I'm breathing. The words were not dramatic. They were not loud. They were a vow. Outside, the storm and the war continued to collide, snow swallowing sound, danger stalking blindly through white chaos. Inside, trapped between locked doors and a man with enemies on every street, she realized the truth he hadn't said out loud. Tonight wasn't just about survival. It was about whether Alessandro Moretti could afford to care about someone again, and whether she could survive being the reason he did. The knock wasn't polite. It wasn't loud either. It was deliberate, 3 sharp raps against the front door, knuckles striking glass with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what stood on the other side. Alessandro froze, not in fear, in calculation. Her heart slammed so hard she thought it might give her away. She could hear the storm outside, the wind screaming, the snow grinding against the building. But that knock cut through everything. A human sound, intentional, close. They're here, she whispered. Yes, he said. He moved instantly, crossing the space between them and placing a hand flat against her back, guiding her toward the kitchen without hesitation. The touch was firm, grounding, not asking permission, but not rough either. protective in a way that made her breath hitch. "Stay behind the freezer," he murmured. "No matter what you hear." "I'm not hiding while you—" He turned to face her, eyes dark and absolute. "This is not a debate." Another knock, louder this time. "Alessandro!" A voice called from outside, muffled by glass and snow. Male, amused. "We know you're in there." Her blood ran cold. "You have two choices," the voice continued. "Come out alone, or we come in and start breaking things." Alessandro's jaw tightened. He didn't look at the door. He looked at her. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the space between them. "This is where you run," she whispered. "You said you had exits. Plans." "I do." "Then go." He didn't move. "If you stay, they'll kill you," she said, panic rising. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "If I leave, they'll take you." Her breath caught painfully. "That's not a choice," she said. "It is," he replied quietly. "And I've already made it." The door shook as something heavy slammed against it. Metal groaned. The glass held, for now. Alessandro reached inside his jacket. Her eyes widened. "You said you wouldn't—" "I said I wouldn't touch you," he corrected. "I never said I wouldn't protect you." He pressed a phone into her hand. "If I tell you to run, you go. Out the back. Follow the alley. Don't stop. And if you don't—" His gaze softened, just for a second. "Then you stay exactly where you are until my men arrive." "You're assuming they will." "I don't assume," he said. "I prepare." The door cracked. A spiderweb of fractures spread across the glass, white lines racing outward as the storm howled in approval. "Last chance," the voice called again. "You're tired, Alessandro. Let's not make this messy." She grabbed his sleeve, fingers digging into expensive fabric. "Please." He covered her hand with his, squeezing once, gentle. Final. "This is why I don't let anyone close," he said softly, "because it turns war into hesitation." The door shattered. Glass exploded inward, snow and wind rushing into the restaurant as 3 men burst through the opening, weapons raised. Chaos followed in an instant. Shouts, movement, violence colliding with the confined space. Alessandro stepped forward, placing himself fully between her and them. "No," he said calmly. The word carried authority that cut through the storm. One of the men hesitated. Just long enough. Alessandro moved. He didn't rush blindly. He didn't fire wildly. Every motion was precise, controlled, devastatingly efficient. He shielded her without looking back, body angling instinctively to block lines of sight, to absorb danger meant for her. She crouched behind the freezer as ordered, hands shaking, heart screaming his name, though she hadn't said it aloud. The sounds were sharp, final, too real. Then, silence. The storm rushed back in to fill it. Alessandro stood near the broken door, breathing hard, blood darkening the sleeve of his jacket. Not all of it his, she realized with a jolt. He turned slowly. She rose on unsteady legs, fear and something fierce burning in her chest. "You stayed," she said. He met her gaze, eyes burning. "You saw me without fear." Snow drifted in through the shattered entrance, settling around his feet like ash. "And I will burn this city down before I let anyone punish you for that." In that moment, she understood the truth. He hadn't chosen escape. He had chosen her, and there would be consequences. For both of them. The silence afterward was worse than the violence. Snow drifted through the broken doorway, settling over shattered glass and overturned chairs like a burial shroud. The storm still raged, but inside the restaurant everything felt suspended, as if the world was holding its breath to see what she would do next. Alessandro stood near the entrance, shoulders rising and falling slowly, blood streaking his knuckles and staining the cuff of his jacket. His face was calm again, too calm, but she could see the cost in the tightness of his jaw, the careful way he shifted his weight. "You're hurt," she said. "I'll live." That's not an answer. He turned toward her fully then, his gaze sharpening, locking onto her as if the rest of the ruined room no longer existed. I'm fine. She took a hesitant step closer, then another. The closer she got, the more she noticed, the shallow cut along his cheek, the faint tremor in his left hand he was trying to hide. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. You could have left. Yes, he replied. I could have. But you didn't. No. Snow swirled in behind him, wind whining through the broken door. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, muted, far away, uncertain if they would ever reach this place. He reached up and closed the door as best he could, dragging a heavy table across the opening to block the wind. The gesture was methodical, almost domestic, despite the destruction surrounding them. When he turned back to her, the man who stood there looked older, not weaker, but heavier, like someone who had just crossed a line he could never step back over. They won't come again tonight, he said. The storm bought us time. Us, she repeated softly. He didn't correct her. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how cold she was now that the adrenaline was fading. What happens when the storm ends? Alessandro studied her for a long moment, as if weighing the truth against the damage it might do. When the road's clear, he said, you can walk away. Her heart skipped painfully. Just like that? Yes. And they'll let me? She asked. Your enemies? No, he said honestly. They won't. Fear slid cold and sharp down her spine. Then that's not really a choice. It is, he said, but you deserve to understand it fully. He stepped closer, not crowding her, but close enough that she could feel the gravity of him. The danger, the protection, the cost. If you leave me, he said quietly, they will kill you. The words were not dramatic, not threatening. They were factual. She stared at him, her pulse roaring in her ears. Because they think I matter to you. They know you do. That happened in one night, she whispered. That's insane. Violence doesn't require time, he said. Only opportunity. She shook her head, struggling to keep her voice steady. So if I stay, you live, he finished. But your life will change. How? You won't be anonymous again, he said. You won't walk freely without protection. You won't be untouched by the consequences of my name. She let out a shaky breath. I didn't ask for this. I know. And you're not apologizing. No, he admitted. Because apologies don't keep people alive. Silence fell between them again, heavy and intimate. She could hear the storm, the distant sirens, her own heart struggling to find a steady rhythm. You're offering me a cage, she said. He didn't flinch. I'm offering you armor. And if I say no? I will still make sure you survive the night, he said. But after that, I can't protect you from a world that now knows your face. She searched his expression for manipulation, for cruelty, for triumph. Found none. Only restraint. You don't touch what you don't respect, she said slowly, and you respect me. Yes. Why? His eyes darkened. Because you didn't look at me like a monster. Her throat tightened. I won't force you, he continued. I won't lock you away. But if you stay knowing this. Nothing will ever be simple again. Every choice will have weight. Every safety will come with a shadow. She looked around the ruined restaurant, at the snow creeping in, at the man who had stood between her and death without hesitation. Simple had already disappeared. When the storm ends, she said, voice barely above a whisper, I decide. He nodded once. Yes. And until then? He met her gaze, unwavering. Until then, you stay with me. Outside, the storm continued to rage, sealing the city in white, and she realized that when morning came, the snow wouldn't be the thing deciding her fate. She would. Morning arrived quietly, as if it didn't want to disturb what the night had altered. The storm loosened its grip inch by inch. Wind softened into a whisper. Snow stopped falling and instead settled, blanketing the city in deceptive calm. Pale light seeped through the fractured front window, illuminating the wreckage inside the restaurant. Broken glass glittering like frost, overturned chairs, blood dried dark against tile. She hadn't slept. Neither had he. They sat on opposite sides of the bar now, a respectful distance between them, the silence no longer tense but heavy with aftermath. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind truth, raw, undeniable. She wrapped her hands around a mug of coffee he'd made without asking. Strong, exactly how she liked it. She hadn't told him that. Outside, a snowplow rumbled past for the first time since nightfall. The sound felt monumental, proof that the world was coming back. "I should go," she said quietly. Alessandro looked at her, his expression unreadable in the morning light. Without the storm, without the darkness, he looked less like a shadow and more like a man who carried too much weight with practiced control. "Yes," he said, "you can." No command, no resistance. That surprised her more than anything else. She stood slowly, joints stiff, exhaustion settling into her bones. She expected fear to rise again when she moved toward the door, expected her instincts to scream at her to stay close to him. They didn't. Instead, there was clarity. She paused near the threshold, snow crunching beneath her boots where it had blown inside overnight. She turned back to face him. "You told me the storm wasn't what trapped me here," she said. "It wasn't. You were?" He inclined his head slightly. "And the world outside still is." She studied him for a long moment. The man who had terrified her, protected her, changed her without asking permission. "You could have forced me to stay," she said. "You didn't. Because staying only matters if it's chosen." The words settled deep in her chest. She took a breath and looked outside again. The street was visible now. Snowbanks lined the sidewalks, cars half buried, people emerging cautiously from buildings like survivors after a disaster. The city was alive again. But she wasn't the same woman who'd locked the door the night before. That woman believed invisibility was safety. She turned back to him. "I'm not walking away because I'm afraid," she said, "and I'm not staying because I feel trapped." His gaze sharpened. "I'm staying," she continued, "because pretending this didn't happen would be the real cage." For the first time since she'd met him, Alessandro looked unguarded. Not weak, never that, but exposed in a way only truth allowed. "This path doesn't lead back to who you were," he said quietly. "I know." "It leads forward," he added, "into things that will hurt, things you can't unsee." "I already crossed that line last night," she replied, "when I didn't look away." He rose slowly and came to stand in front of her, not close enough to claim, but close enough to acknowledge what stood between them. "When the snow melts," he said, "nothing about your life will be simple." She met his gaze, steady. "It never really was." Outside, sunlight reflected off white streets, dazzling and clean, disguising the violence and fear that had passed through them hours earlier. People laughed nervously. Cars honked. Life resumed. But she knew better now. Storms didn't always trap you. Sometimes they stripped everything down to truth. She stepped past him, then stopped. "One condition," she said. He turned. "You don't decide my life for me," she continued. "You protect, but you don't own." Something like respect flared in his eyes. "Agreed." "And when I'm afraid," she added, "you don't silence it. You stand with me in it." He nodded once. "Always." She extended her hand. He took it, not possessively, not urgently, but with the gravity of someone who understood exactly what that gesture meant. Outside, the city breathed again. Inside her, something entirely new had begun. The snow hadn't trapped her with the Mafia boss. It had erased the life she was merely surviving, and in its place it had given her a future she was finally choosing.